Hello, everybody, and welcome to Mr. Saucedo's YouTube videos. Today, we're going to be talking about competition. We introduced habitat and niche last time, so let's actually talk about competition. So, what is competition? Well, first of all, competition is kind of self-explanatory, right? It's when two organisms are trying to acquire the same resource, and that resource can be anything. It can be food, water, space, a mate. It can be kind of anything. And sometimes you're in competition with your own species, other times you're in competition with other species. It just depends. And so there are four major outcomes of competition. The first is niche partitioning, which is super cool. And so this little guy is a warbler, and warblers are notoriously good at niche partitioning. So niche partitioning is kind of what it sounds like. It's you have your space, I have my space. And so warblers of different species can share portions of the same tree. And so instead of saying, hey, no, this is my tree, I mean, it's a pretty big tree. So you can have different species of warbler that are inhabiting different parts of the same tree. And they'll be totally fine partitioning this into an area for them and an area for some other species. And so that's kind of niche partitioning. Um, this is obviously more of a habitat partition, but niche partitioning also can lead to a lot of interesting adaptations because before you know it, if you're fulfilling the same role as one of these other birds in this tree, whichever one is the best adapted for the situation is probably going to end up reproducing more frequently and before you know it taking over the tree. So it's also important most of the time that either they are hunting different things, they eat something different, like they are fulfilling a different purpose in the environment. And so niche partitioning kind of gets into the basics of that. Is that that is one, and this is like a very positive outcome of competition. But there are some not so fun ones like competitive exclusion. So, competitive exclusion is where one species is better at adapting a resource, so the other species is excluded and it gets pushed away. Barnacles are extremely are good a good indicator of this. Some barnacles are better at adapting to living outside of water for longer periods of time. And so they will live in different locations near the shoreline because of that. So again, this is high tide. This is about as high as the water level gets. And so these guys are very good at being able to adapt to not needing to be in water the entire time, whereas this is low tide. And so you can see this species is going to be less adapted to living outside of the water for long periods of time. And so you can have two entire species of barnacle that are different from one another, but they are literally excluding this one because this one is not as good at living outside of water, whereas this smaller one is. And that's competitive exclusion. And again, that happens because they are better adapted to a particular, to getting a resource. And in this case, it's holding on to water and being able to survive with a particular amount of oxygen that way. Extinction is probably the most negative. It is the end of that species because of a lack of resource. The most common and probably cited example of that are dodo birds. They went extinct because their forest homes were destroyed. Other animals were introduced that hunted them. They had no predator, so they were totally okay just walking up to people, and they would just have their heads chopped off, and they would get eaten as a result. There are moa. There's a particular type of eagle that hunted these weird looking ostrich creatures called moa. When the moa went extinct, so did the eagle. Um, Again, extinction, the end of an entire species. And then, of course, the most common of them is if you're not going to go extinct and you're not going to share and you're not going to get pushed to a different location, then more likely than not, you're going to have to adapt. And so remember, an adaptation is a beneficially inherited trait that gets passed on. And so now you are fulfilling a different niche. And so as a result, you are forming a new species. And so finches are a great example of that. These are Darwin's finches. And you can see that they all come from a common ancestor that is just this regular old bird, this regular old finch. And before you know it, you have all these finches that, are adapted to eating seeds or eating bugs or using tools or living in this particular place where the other ones can't get to it. And so you have all of these crazy adaptations that can come from just a single finch because they're going to be competing with each other. And if, hey, there's this other food source, maybe we go over here instead, that can lead to speciation, to new species developing over time.